And welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur, talking politics today. Lots happening, of course, in our country now that Parliament has been prorogued. We're going to have a new Prime Minister one way or the other in the next few months. And, then where are we headed? What are Canadians wanting to see change, right? What were we tired of here when you look at the polls? What are we hoping for? All right, and should be a good conversation today. Our guest is Brian Rushfeldt. You might remember that name. He's the former president of Canada Family Action, a group that, he used to lobby government all the time and, try to bring about positive common sense change to some of the laws that were being put in and so forth. And, good things. He knows what's going on from all those years of experience doing that. So I thought it'd be good to have his perspective on what's happening now and where we're headed. So, Brian, thanks for taking time for us here today.
Well, thanks for being back with you, Paul. It's been, I think, 8 or 9 years since you and I talked.
It's been a while. Yeah.
I always love the opportunity, and I love your perspective on things as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you did this for how many years? Was it 17, something like that?
17 years, yeah.
Okay, so you've seen a lot of water under the bridge there. Lots of changes
Good things,
over the years.
bad things, in between things, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we look at our current situation in Canada now that Parliament has been prorogued. Prime Minister is going to be resigning at some point. I think it's March 24th. They have their new leader in place. And the reasons given for proroguing Parliament is that, the Prime Minister was saying there's gridlock in Parliament. Well, okay, yes, there was some of that, but there's an argument to be made. Maybe that was of your own doing,
Well, and there was a good reason for being gridlocked because most of the rest of Parliament wanted an election.
Yeah, exactly. Does the Liberal Party, have the confidence of the House? Well, no. So, when the Governor General gave permission to prorogue Parliament, I guess technically, going by the fact that the non-confidence motions were defeated in the House, so I guess that's what they have to go by. But we all know that there isn't a lot of confidence there in the current government for sure. So I think most of us would say, this was prorogued simply to hold an internal, leadership election, and I think we probably all agree on that. So it is what it is, and probably not much we can do about it. I know there's a couple of lawsuits I think that are being filed at this point, but I'm guessing maybe unlikely that those go anywhere. But proroguing does do some things, and maybe that's favorable. Any thoughts on that? Because some of those bills that were quite controversial aren't going through. First one that comes to mind is Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. That's, hallelujah, that's not going through.
Well, I think that's the only upside to the proroguing was because right now we don't have a functional government.
Right.
Well, surely then if we don't have a functional government, bills and pieces of legislation cannot be passed and should not be passed because there's no debate, there's no votes. And so that is the good news, that some of those things are hopefully dead forever, but they're certainly dead until after the next election. And so it annoyed me that he would prorogue, though, and sort of extend his time in office and use the excuse, well, we need a Liberal leader, when he kept saying, well, I want to go till I want to run the next election myself. Now, all of a sudden, he's not going to, and I'm glad for that.
Well, yeah, and you think about some of these bills that were like Bill C-63.
Yes.
I think Canadians are tired of seeing those kinds of things, foisted upon us. Again, dealing with freedom of speech, hate speech. Now, of course, does anybody like hate speech? Well, no, I don't like it when people call me names. But you know what? You can call me names, Brian, and you should have the freedom to do so. All right? It doesn't make you a criminal. And this basically makes any crime, had it passed, that's motivated by hate, you could actually spend life in prison. I'm going like, what? Really? Okay. How do you define that hate? Who defines it? And it's just such a subjective, thing.
Well, and I
could
think
cause all kinds of problems.
part of the reason the Liberals are going down and down and down in the polls is something you said. People are really tired and fearful, quite frankly, of having things forced on them by some government. whether they elected and voted Liberal or whether they didn't. People don't like the government saying, well, this is the way you're going to have to live your life. You're going to have to get vaccinated. You're going to have to do this. You can't say this and use this word any longer. And
Yeah.
I think the majority of Canadians, a high majority of Canadians, are saying, we don't want you telling us how to live our life. You already have interfered with so many aspects of our life through taxes, if nothing else. And so I think the people are just sort of at that stage of saying, enough is enough. We don't want this kind of imposed control on us any longer.
Yeah, and but it's funny because there is a significant portion of our population that does like big government, the nanny state from cradle to grave, right? And so you see something like Bill C-293, the Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Act. It was a private member's bill, but still. I mean, you see something here, had that gone through, you had all kinds of protests, of course, from the ag sector, in particular beef and pork producers, because basically we're saying a government committee could essentially make the decision to shut down all beef production in Canada. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what? Yeah, because, we're concerned that it might cause health problems. It just seems such an extreme step, and then we hear, comments like, well, we'd probably never do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me feel comforted, and I trust you. Sure.
I think history tells us something different on that, because once a law becomes a law, it almost is never rescinded, and it's almost always applied in some way or another at some point. And so, when I hear that, I think that's going too far. No, I don't believe one word of that.
Yeah, and I think most of us would probably agree with that view, going, yeah, we're not going to trust the government on that particular one there. Another issue that, another bill that didn't go through is Bill C-413. Some people call it the Residential School Denialism Private Members Bill. That was, NDP MP Leah Gazan. Basically, this would make it a criminal offense, as I understand it, to willfully promote hatred against Indigenous people by condoning, denying, or downplaying or justifying the Indian residential school system in Canada. Wow. Talk about my way or the highway. And people have strong opinions on that. And the issue is, though, I know people, I have friends who are Indigenous, who actually speak quite favorably about the residential school system. Mm-hmm. In fact, the actual Truth and Reconciliation Commission report has sections in it that weren't very widely publicized, but the people who actually read the whole thing, I think 3,500 pages, there's sections in there where, again, the residential, the Indian community was quite, there's certainly portions of the Indian community that found parts of the whole system actually quite favorable.
Well, I think there were some very favorable things in that, and certainly there was some noble intention of some of those educators. It wasn't that they were trying to oust the Indigenous people from the country. They wanted the kids to have an opportunity and to have opportunities like the rest of us have. So there was a noble cause or noble reason for that. Now, promoting willful hate against anybody is inappropriate. And in fact, it depends on how far you go. I've had people, in fact, when I was president of Canada Family Action, I had 3 death threats and had the police investigating. I didn't have a law to protect me, so I don't like death threats and hate any more than anybody else. But that bill, with the wording in there, it's very, very troubling, because that could be applied in so many ways. And we know the words mean something. Every word in that means something different, and it means something different to almost every lawyer, probably to every judge. Even if you get before a judge, they'd interpret some of those words. Oh, that's what that means. So I think we have to be very careful about the wording that we put into our legislation, for sure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And certainly, I'm not condoning, you're not condoning anything that would be racist. Were there some serious issues that happened that were not good, in the residential schools? Of course. No one's denying that. We're simply saying, hey, we should be able to have open debate on this.
Yes, let's talk about
seeking truth.
And ask questions, if nothing else, that need to be asked, for sure.
Very much so. We somehow our society needs to, especially with teaching our kids, we need to cause them to be just always asking questions. It's just, right now it's no, you agree with me or else, like, I don't want that society for my kids. I want them to be able to ask good questions and see some decent answers. You don't have to agree on the answer, but hey.
Well, unfortunately, I've got friends who are students at the university.
Yep.
I won't say which one, but
Okay.
that said we aren't allowed to even ask certain questions any longer, or
Wow.
we get shut down because the professors want us to believe and spout back the same thing that they think. And so they're not encouraging free thought, deep thought, investigative thought. They're saying this is what we want you to think, and this is how we want you to speak it, because we're right, and that's a scary situation for universities. And of course, when I went to university a number of years ago now, I ran into a little bit of that, like 45 years ago,
Yeah.
where one professor convinced that I was wrong and she was right, and I didn't have the right to ask questions or challenge that. So
Yeah. Something.
that's a bad place for society to go.
Yeah. And it seems that's the overarching, predominant, typical university situation where questions that are uncomfortable, that don't follow the political narrative of the day, are not welcome. And
Yes.
there's this cancel culture happening. It used to be our universities were, known for that. That was what they were proud of, is open, honest, vigorous
Yeah,
debate, and,
if you want
bring
to
up
counter me,
controversial ideas. Yeah,
yeah, we learn from that, but we don't learn from
absolutely.
being force fed.
You bet. Again, Parliament reconvening March 24th. Potential replacements. Chrystia Freeland, probably the front runner, looks like, in the polls we've seen so far. Mark Carney, possibly throwing his hat in here. Former BC Premier Christy Clark. Those are kind of the main ones so far. Any thoughts on, will it make a difference? At this point, I mean, the polls show, basically the Liberal Party is the Titanic. It's on the way down.
I I'm not sure, knowing the way that the political parties, and I include all political parties, but the Liberal Party especially, it has set out the rules. I'm not sure who to expect to win on this because there's so much stuff goes on behind the scenes. Of course, $350,000 to even get in the race is going
Yeah.
to probably hinder some. But between the three that you mentioned, which are basically considered the three front runners, if it was my choice, I wouldn't choose any of them because they've all been part of that liberal group who have caused so much problem financially, socially in our country. So do I want to just replace one person with another person who's already proven that they've supported most of that? I don't know who else might rise up. I
Yeah.
actually think it would be nice to have somebody that's really smart rise up that is not a politician already. And Mark
Right.
Carney's
Yeah.
not in that group, in my opinion.
In that sense, having somebody outside of the liberal brand that we've
Yes.
seen over the last number of years, that might be helpful for them,
One
right?
thing I raised, and I've been getting flack for that, is 14-year-olds are allowed to vote in the leadership race.
Yeah, because it's internal. That's right.
It's
Yeah.
internal. But in fact, I argue the fact that we are actually picking a prime minister. It's not just a liberal leader in the system, it's picking a prime minister. Do we want 14-year-olds picking our next prime minister? And I say no to that.
Yeah,
And so
I hear you.
part of my response is, okay, I'm going to become a member of the Liberal Party because we're picking the prime minister. So I want to have my say. And I don't
Right.
know how much flack I'm going to get for that, but I'll probably get
Interesting.
some.
Yeah, probably for sure. Yeah, and I know. I mean, I tend to lean conservative in my viewpoints. People are aware of that. But you know what? I mean, I just want to throw this out there. I actually don't, in one sense, care a whole lot about political labels. If the Liberals were to elect a leader, or the NDP, that was held values that I hold dear, like being pro-life, not going into deficit budgets and so forth, right? Proper rules that we don't have this rotating, parole system where they get out on parole, commit another crime, go back in, get out again, all these kinds of things, common sense stuff. And if you had somebody standing up for that clearly in the Liberal Party, would I switch my vote to Liberal? Probably.
I agree with you, Paul. I've been probably, I guess, what people consider a lifelong conservative, but not because I believe the Conservative Party. It's because I believe in conservative principles.
Yeah.
And if we had a principled government who didn't lie to us, didn't waste money, didn't hire all kinds of unneeded civil servants, actually set a budget and then lived within the budget instead of setting a budget and just going out and throwing money wildly. If I had somebody like that would actually live their life like that and function like that, and I'll tell you who used to do that in my young days, and I don't remember much about that. Ernest Manning was our premier in Alberta for 25 years because he did the right things that cared about people.
There's a reason he was there for 25 years, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he basically, and I heard him say, even as a young child, I remember him saying this, or seeing a recording of it somewhere maybe. I'm not an elected official per se. I'm a servant of you people. And he considered himself a servant of the people. And that's why he was so popular.
Wow. Yeah, boy, I think you're nailing something there. Wow. People would love to see that, I think, because, what do Canadians want to see changed? What are we tired of? Well, one thing, as you mentioned, the massive deficits, right? I mean, if we lived our personal, budgets that way, we'd all be broke, right? We wouldn't be able to get a credit card. Oh man, yeah. So what are people looking for? Like, what kind of traits in a leader do we hate? What kind do we love? Well, I guess we would all say we hate dishonesty, right?
Yeah. I think we've seen within the last 8 years, and this isn't new to government, but certainly there's been a lot of it where it's ethics violation. And I always argue ethics violation. If it was me, it would be illegal or criminal activity, not ethics violation. We've seen some pretty serious ethics violations, I think, by the Prime Minister and others, and but we don't see any consequences for that. So when you have a government that can act illegally, in my opinion, I'll use that term, illegally, and nothing's done about it, pretty soon the majority of people are going to look at that and say, we can't trust these people. They say one thing, they do another. They bury things. I always laugh when I hear a politician say, I'm going to be open and transparent. Right.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
So much non-transparency and I think that's one of the big issues. I mean, the debts are one, the dishonesty in politics is one, the fact that they're wasting money on things that don't make your life or my life or 99% of the life of Canadians better. Those are some of the things that I think Canadians are wanting changed. And I hope that we see some of those things change in the next government.
I sure hope so as well. Of course, affordability always a huge election issue. And the price of housing and so forth. So how do we combat some of that? Well, certainly I think we need to cut some spending. One issue that is when you look at the civil service and the size of it since Trudeau came in 2015, I guess it was. So government bureaucrat hiring, basically, it's increased more than 43%, even though the country's population has grown by less than 15%.
Yes.
So do we actually need that many government bureaucrats, in that same period of time? Like we're going, 43% compared to 15%. Just something seems very wrong with that. We've grown quite fat, if you will, in the government.
Well, even in the city that I live in, I question that because we've added a lot of civil service in the past 3 years to our. Now, some people think it's because of the mayor. Some people think it's because there's a little group of people running the city. But I often ask, what if we got rid of 20% of those people? What would change for me? Would I not get the water, and would I not get light? Would I not get my garbage picked up? Would the
Yeah.
streets go in disrepair? Like what would we lose if we cut back? So if that's the case, then I think it's civil service bloat, because we've got people that are
Yeah.
really not contributing to our culture and our society. So why are we paying them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do we actually need that kind of increase in our civil service? And I think most of us,
I think
the vast majority of Canadians would say, yeah, it seems overkill. That needs to change.
I think the majority would, yes.
So we need to demand that they change that. Now, nobody likes to see people lose jobs, but reality is it's not healthy for our economy or for our government or for our nation. So also, apparently over $120 billion spent so far to grow Canada's green economy. Now, I know some people are passionate about that, and okay. I mean, what comes to mind is the Volkswagen subsidy handed out by our federal government. I mean, this is a company from Germany,
Yes.
right? I mean, if you're going to give a big subsidy, let's maybe pick a Canadian company,
Yes. Maybe
But
support our own people.
yeah, well, I mean, they're building it in Canada, so I guess that's one argument, okay, that it's going to create some jobs, but to the tune of $13 billion from our tax money, really? Are we ever going to see that turned around?
Well, and
I'm
I
pretty
think it
doubtful
was
on that.
so fast because one of the things that I've read, and I think 4 cities in Canada now that we're going to go EV buses for all the transportation.
Yeah.
4 cities now have backed off on that and said, well, no, we're going to back off on the EV buses.
Yep.
Well, I think we put $13 billion into something that we shouldn't have put in yet. I'm not saying EV is not somehow the way we should go or should develop, but let's develop it with some common sense and put money where it's going to be productive, not dump it in and then say, oh, we lost it.
Yeah, for sure. Also, a lot of spending, I think, on woke causes that people get tired of. And that's we could probably do a whole show on that. Maybe spending that on things that would be higher priority, right? Healthcare, whatever it might be. Protecting our borders and so forth. Fighting, combating drug smuggling and that sort of thing. So how do we? Any thoughts on? I guess, man. The values we have in Canada that we used to hold dear. I mean, again, our nation was built on Judeo-Christian principles. It really was. Now we seem to have less of that. We might maybe have a mindset that government owes me. Big Daddy needs to take care of me and so forth. I mean, our value system seems to have changed over the years here. So I don't know all the reasons for that. I mean, part of it I think is our immigration system, and of course we have seen a number of polls saying, hey, we need to change something about our immigration system because we're seeing these, again, the price of housing going up, so forth. That's part of it. But also part of it is the values clash. We're seeing these protests that are anti-Semitic, for example, in the streets, advocating violence, death to Canada, death to the U.S., death to Israel, and so forth, things like that. So if we're allowing immigrants to come in from certain nations and cultures that have that mindset, not all cultures are equal. So I think we somehow need to vet the values before we let people into Canada.
I think our immigration system has been broken for a lot of years, actually. But I think of it in the more recent terms and times. We've imported people or immigrated people, whatever term. We've brought so many in, we don't have places for them to live. Well, common sense would say, why would you do that? And regardless of where they're from. Then we've brought people in who are totally unemployable because they can't speak the language. They hold totally different values, so they wouldn't work out in most companies. And so we've overloaded Canada with immigrants, in my opinion. And again, regardless of the company or the country that they've come from, regardless of the values they've come from. But we used to have something in our immigration common sense approach is let's integrate. If you want to come to live in my nation, integrate with us and try and make something better in our nation, not go out and protest and burn and fight. And I think that the value system, whether it comes down to a religious value or a cultural value, we have to start looking at the basis of that.
Yeah, well, the problem is, from everybody I've talked to so far, that we simply have a lot of check boxes to, when immigrants apply, but there's no face-to-face interview saying, can we find out what kind of values this person has? That's just a loser system. It really is for Canada, generally speaking, because we can't accurately determine if that person is going to be a good fit or not.
And there's some people that are intentionally coming to Canada to cause destruction.
Yeah, and that's why Trump has some concerns. And I understand the concerns. And again, I'm not necessarily a Trump fan, but boy, I can understand why he's concerned that people immigrating to Canada could slip across the border into the U.S. and cause problems there as well. Certainly, we need to see some changes, I think, in the freedom areas. And that's, of course, why we saw the big trucker convoy and all of that happening. But freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to gather, freedom to say no to a vaccine, all these kinds of things. These are real issues. And I'm hoping that people will want to see some change on that in this next election. And it certainly seems that way. And I think politicians also use fear sometimes as a political tool, and we saw that, I think, in the pandemic, back in 2019. So, all it would take is another pandemic to come our way, and it probably will happen.
I think it will.
Do we see a repeat of that? How do we insulate ourselves against that sort of thing?
Well, I think a part of that change will happen, I think, if we change the government to, and I don't hold 100% hope in a conservative government, but I hold more hope in the conservative than certainly what we've seen with the Liberals. And so we do need people in the government at all levels, city, provincial, and federal. We need people that actually will think about these things, discuss these things, not decide that they know best.
All right. I got to leave it there. I'm sorry. I didn't actually realize I'm almost out of time. I'm so sorry. Brian, I need to give you more time. It's been a great conversation, so thank you for sharing your perspective on this.
Many things to consider as Canadians.
You bet. Thanks for watching WizeUp.ca, or you can check us out at app.corcoplus.com. God bless.